A day in the life of a medieval inn. It's still dark when the first sounds stir inside the old timber-framed inn, at the edge of a well-trodden road leading into a small market town in 14th century England. You hear the creak of a floorboard, the low murmur of voices from beneath the thick thatched roof. Somewhere a hound shifts and thumps its tail against the wall. It is not the grand kind of inn found in cities, but rather a modest establishment, equal parts tavern, lodging house, stables and hearth for gossip and news. There are no signs outside, no posted menus, no reception desk. Just a wide oak door with iron hinges and a muddied threshold worn by boots and hooves. The innkeeper is already up, stirring a copper pot that hangs over the hearth. The smell is earthy, barley, onions, perhaps yesterday's leftover pottage reheated with a dash of dried herbs. Breakfast isn't an elaborate affair. For most travelers and townsfolk, it's a bowl of porridge and perhaps a mug of weak ale or cider. Water isn't trusted. It rarely is. The grains were boiled for hours, not just to soften them, but to make sure no one falls ill from whatever the mill stream may have carried down. The morning light filters through small, oiled parchment windows, hazy and amber-colored. Candles are still burning low on wooden holders, their stubs blackened with soot. The interior smells of damp wool, wood smoke, and the ever-present tang of hay and dung from the adjacent stable. In the large main room, trestle tables are still sticky from last night's beer. Scraps of bread crust and fish bones are swept, away by a tired scullion, a boy of perhaps 10 who earns his keep by scrubbing, hauling, and running errands, just as his older brother did before he left to become an apprentice blacksmith. Upstairs, or rather, up a crooked ladder leading to a loft, travelers shift beneath coarse wool blankets. Privacy is a rare luxury. Guests are packed together by price and rank. A minor merchant might get a spot in the common loft, sharing straw bedding with strangers. A knight might get his own curtained corner, though privacy doesn't block out the smell of the chamber pot or the occasional snores and coughs of his fellow travelers. Everyone, from pilgrim to peddler, from steward to minstrel, has learned the same truth. An inn is a place to sleep, not to rest. The day's work begins not with grand gestures, but with firewood. A stable boy lugs it in by armfuls. One fire for the kitchen hearth, another for heating the bath barrel if any traveler is rich or brave enough to ask for one. There are no towels, no soaps as we know them. The bath, if requested, is lukewarm, water in a tub once used for soaking grain. Cleanliness is mostly symbolic, especially in winter. Lye soap, made from animal fat and ashes, is harsh and often reserved for laundering tunics rather than skin. Downstairs, the innkeeper's wife readies the day's stores. She cuts bread from the coarse round loaves made 2 days ago. She pinches, off mold where needed, sets aside the worst bits for the pigs. Ale barrels are checked for leaks. The ale is small beer, low in alcohol, consumed by children and adults alike. It's brewed weak to stretch the grain and avoid the dangers of contaminated water. The brewing vat in the courtyard still smells of yeast and boiled wort, a smell so familiar that no one notices it anymore. Outside, travelers are beginning to arrive. A cart rattles into the yard, pulled by a pair of tired oxen. A friar hops down, rubbing his back, followed by a miller who grumbles about axle grease. They're en route to a nearby priory and have chosen this inn because it's known. If not for comfort, then at least for predictability. The friar carries parchment sealed in wax, letters for a noble household. The miller is simply along for the ride, looking to unload a sack of barley at market. The kitchen grows warmer, noisier. The innkeeper's daughter has taken up the mortar, and pestle, grinding garlic and wild herbs for the midday stew. A slab of salted pork yellowed with age and fat is hacked into chunks and thrown into the bubbling pot. There is no fixed menu. The inn serves what it has. If the pigs were slaughtered last week, there's bacon and lard aplenty. If the hens are laying, there might be a few eggs, boiled and salted, then offered to travelers as a rare treat. Commerce moves slowly in the inn. A traveling peddler lays out tin brooches and ribbon on a small cloth near the hearth, hoping the friar or the innkeeper's wife might spare a few pence. Coins are rare. More often, payment is in kind: half a sack of oats, a pair of bootlaces, a hunk of cheese. The innkeeper carefully measures each exchange with a weathered hand and a shrewd eye. Noon brings more activity. A messenger on horseback arrives, spattered with mud, his cloak stiff with rain from the southern hills. He speaks briefly with the innkeeper, hands over a sealed letter, then demands a fresh horse and bread to go. No time to linger. He's bound. For the county sheriff with news, what kind no one dares ask. Messengers are to be fed quickly and questioned never. Their business is often grim. Meanwhile, outside in the stable, the boy mucks out the straw. He curses softly and shovels the manure into a wooden wheelbarrow already nearly full. He will dump it near the back wall, where a shallow pit collects the waste for composting or sale to nearby farmers. The smell is constant, heavy, but no one remarks on it. It is as normal as the smoke curling from the chimney. In the side room, once a storeroom, now an improvised dormitory, an elderly widow clutches her prayer beads. She's on pilgrimage, they say, to a shrine 2 days north. She doesn't speak much, but she pays on time. She spends her days murmuring Latin, sewing patches onto her sleeves, and helping the innkeeper's daughter render tallow into candles when her hands are steady. Even here, among the animals, drunkards, and noisy merchants, she holds on to something quieter, some version of peace. As the morning bleeds into the stillness of the early afternoon, the inn takes on a rhythm. Travelers come and go, the pot continues to simmer, and life returns to the repetitive beat of maintenance. There are no great events to speak of, just the daily details. A spilled bucket, a snapped wheel spoke, a loose floorboard in need of repair. But somehow, these moments are more revealing than any grand history of kings and battles. They show you the scaffolding of real life, the quiet persistence of survival. And yet, as the innkeeper's wife notices that the salt stores are running low and a rat has gnawed through the grain sack again, a question lingers at the edge of her thoughts. How many generations before or after her have stood in this same room, facing the same fire, stirring the same pot, wondering the same quiet question, what will tomorrow bring, and who will arrive at the door next? Midday markets and quiet deals. The day has now fully unfolded, and with it, the inn transforms from a sleepy resting place into a hive of mid-level movement. Not the frenzy of a royal court or the roar of a battlefield, but a steadier kind of motion, slow commerce, whispered agreements, domestic labors, and the persistent effort to meet small needs with smaller means. It is now late morning, edging into afternoon, and most travelers are gone, either continuing on foot or cart to the nearby market or leaving altogether for destinations further afield. But others remain or arrive in their place, and with them come the small negotiations of survival. You notice the smell first: meat broth with lentils and wild greens, nettles mostly, cooking in a wide-bottomed pot that has hung above the fire since dawn. There is bread now, too, flat, coarse rounds with gritty specks of bran and chaff. If there's a luxury here, it lies not in the ingredients, but in their warmth. The innkeeper's wife, having fed the stew more salt and a heel of dried root, vegetable, now ladles it into carved wooden bowls, offering it to a group of 3 travelers who appear to be minor reeves or estate men, judging by their tattered records, satchels, and muddy calfskin boots. The inn serves as a kind of informal information center for the local area, especially in regions without a parish clerk or manor steward nearby. A scribe might stop here to copy a will or read a land claim aloud to witnesses. These 3 men pore over some parchment and argue in hushed tones about the boundaries of a tenant's holdings and whether a missing ox could shift obligations, owed in kind. The innkeeper listens politely, though it is not his business. Still, he knows the tenant in question and the missing ox, for that matter. It wandered into the barley field last week, or so the stable boy claims. Meanwhile, out in the yard, the blacksmith's apprentice has arrived with a wheel rim and a bag of nails, having promised the innkeeper a week ago to make minor repairs to a creaking cart. He works quietly under the mild sun, tapping rhythmically while the chickens scratch nearby, utterly indifferent to his presence. The cart belongs to a traveling cloth seller who awaits repairs inside with a mug of small ale and a grimy roll of imported wool slung over one shoulder. The cloth, probably Flemish, is of decent quality, but it's hard to sell in a village where people spin and dye their own. Midday is also the hour when disputes most often arise. With everyone awake and sober, land claims and livestock thefts tend to be relitigated over bread and ale. A woman, perhaps a widow or a tenant's wife, has come to the inn with a complaint. Her hen has been stolen, she claims, and though she doesn't accuse anyone directly, her gaze lingers on a boy in the corner, chewing a suspiciously fresh drumstick. The innkeeper lets her speak, then shrugs. He is not the reeve, nor is he the sheriff, and besides, hens go missing. He offers her a bowl of stew, and for now that must suffice. In a back room near the stables, the real business of the day is happening. A parchment is being discreetly signed by 3 men, 2 local traders and a wandering notary who came in late the night before. They speak in hushed voices and pass a beeswax seal between them. It is a deal concerning a timber lot outside town, and who shall pay the bishop's levy for hauling it through the Priory Road. It seems trivial, yet these kinds of quiet arrangements shape much of daily medieval economics. Nothing gets built, transported, or sold without someone else exacting a toll. An inn, positioned near crossroads, becomes the very ground on which these quiet revolutions unfold. Just as that matter concludes, the innkeeper's daughter calls out from the kitchen, summoning her mother. The soup pot has cracked along its bottom seam. Iron rivets rusted loose, or perhaps it was mishandled by the scullion boy. Regardless, it's no small inconvenience. The pot was made by a smith in the next county and won't be easily replaced. They'll use the spare, a shallower cauldron, but it won't hold enough. Already her mother is calculating which portion of the upcoming week's meals will need thinning. And then, something unusual. A minstrelsy troupe appears on the road. 4 of them, with colorful caps and 1 battered lute. They're young and loud and barely fed. One is missing 2 fingers, which he compensates for by tapping rhythmically on a skin drum. They ask if they may perform in the courtyard for food and coins. The innkeeper shrugs, he's seen worse, and lets them play. The music is rough but merry, and a few locals wandering by from the village stop to listen. One drops a penny. The poor drummer grins like a man given a crown. By late afternoon, a different kind of customer arrives. Tired, dusty, but authoritative. A bailiff and his assistant from the local manor, riding with satchels filled with account records. They're conducting a tally of nearby holdings and staying overnight on their way to the regional hall. They bring with them expectation, paperwork, and a mild sense of threat. These are not men who barter or charm. They command with ledger and wax seal. The innkeeper receives them with cautious respect. He's had trouble with bailiffs before, unpaid lodgings, unwanted confiscations, but it's better to be accommodating than to challenge the king's agents, however minor. They request rooms, food, and ink, not wine, which is expensive and rare here, but meat if available, and clean bedding. The bedding, of course, is as clean as it can be, which is to say, not especially. The innkeeper assigns them the back room, formerly occupied by the cloth merchant who now sulks mildly by the hearth, unimpressed by his downgrade. No one lodges permanently at a rural inn. It is always temporary, always negotiable. In the side yard, the stable boy has noticed something odd, an unfamiliar saddlebag hidden under a loose board near the haystack. He tells the innkeeper, who peers at it, touches it, then tells the boy to leave it where it is. It's not his business. Not yet. Perhaps a traveler stashed it. Perhaps someone intends to retrieve it under the cover of night. The inn is full of such tiny mysteries, never quite rising to the level of scandal, but always humming beneath the daily routine. By now the stew is thinned again, the bread growing stale, and the candles being dipped for the evening. In the courtyard, a pig snorts lazily in the muck, and the travelers begin to settle in again. There's a rhythm to it all. The arrival and departure, the barter and boil, the stories exchanged over soup and ale. In this small inn, on an unmarked road, in a year whose number few can read, the full machinery of medieval society turns, quietly but steadily. And yet, as the bailiff closes the shutter against the dusk and begins scratching numbers into his ledger, a new question surfaces. In a world so rigidly ordered by rank, tithe, and toil, where even the stew must stretch, To meet demand, who truly holds the power in a place like this? Those who carry seals or those who stir the pot? Nightfall, secrets and survival as night approaches. The inn takes on its most quietly intense form. Light becomes scarce and precious, flickering in pockets of tallow and resin. The air thickens, not just with smoke from the hearth and candles, but with the layered residue of an entire day. Boiled onions, sweat-soaked tunics, the sour edge of spilled ale, and the damp musk of the animals bedded nearby. The transformation from day to night in a medieval inn is not a descent into peace, but into a different kind of alertness. Quieter, yes, but watchful. You notice the change first in the sounds. Gone are the voices of transaction and minor complaints, replaced by lower tones. Muttered prayers, snores, the creak of beams as the roof settles. There's no true silence here, only a shifting blend of noises that softens after sunset. Beneath it all, the innkeeper walks softly in his worn leather boots, sweeping hearth ash into a bucket, his eyes pausing now and then on the more suspicious. Yes, the inn's communal room, its heart, now becomes a layered sleeping arrangement. Those with means take the few private rooms or loft space, while others unroll woolen cloaks or bundled straw mats and sleep where they sat earlier. A merchant lies on his side using his ledger as a pillow. One of the traveling minstrels curls beside the dying fire, his battered lute tucked protectively against his chest. In a corner, the widow who lost her hen earlier lies motionless under a patched shawl, her mouth forming silent words, prayers or curses, no one is sure. The bailiff and his assistant remain awake, hunched over an oak table with a rushlight guttering between them. They speak in subdued tones about collection totals and suspiciously underreported yields. One name recurs, a farmer who lives just beyond the next village, who seems to have no grain stores but whose livestock count mysteriously. Grew this past year. A visit will be required. The assistant nods grimly, making a note. They do not consider how this might end for the farmer. That is not their function. In the shadows near the stable, a low conversation begins. The cloth merchant has finally followed, up on the hidden saddlebag, now holding it in the straw as he speaks in low German to another man, a tanner perhaps, or someone in the salt trade, given the white crust edging his boots. Their voices are too low to catch clearly, but there's the flicker of coin and a sharp exchange about something being untaxed. Smuggling? Possibly. Or simply trade done without tithe, an offense in theory, but common in practice. The church will not be informed. The innkeeper has seen such exchanges before and does not interfere. It's not fear that holds him back. It's calculation. If there's trouble, better to know who is involved. Behind the main building, in a low, cramped shed that smells of old hay and damp wood, the stable boy tries to sleep. He wraps his arms around a cat for warmth, and though he is exhausted from hauling pails, mending reins, and turning spits, sleep will not come easily. He remembers the hidden saddlebag. What was inside? Gold? Letters? Nothing? He doesn't know, but he understands enough to feel that it mattered. In a world where he owns nothing and answers to everyone, knowledge is the only coin he might someday wield. Meanwhile, upstairs in the narrow loft, a pair of travelers whisper. One is a priest on pilgrimage, or so he says. The other, a young woman traveling alone with a bruised ankle and an unusually sharp tongue. Their conversation, barely audible above the creaking beams, turns philosophical, or at least mildly theological. Is purgatory a real place? The woman asks, or simply an excuse to sell indulgences? The priest chuckles but does not answer. Later, when the candle between them gutters out, neither one sleeps quickly. Back downstairs, the kitchen is dark, the soup pot empty. The innkeeper's wife moves softly through the space, checking the spice jar hidden in the chimney corner. She counts the cloves by touch, still 6, enough for another few weeks if she uses them wisely. Clove, like nutmeg or pepper, must be hoarded carefully, not just for flavor but because they can be bartered like coin. A few grains of cinnamon can open doors that money cannot. Bartered like coin, a few grains of cinnamon can open doors that money cannot. The inn, for all its roughness, is a place of real consequence, not just as a building or business, but as a node, a convergence of bodies, secrets, intentions, and needs. Ideas pass through it. Political gossip, news of uprisings, hints of new taxes or foreign war. A nobleman might stop here tomorrow and ask about road conditions. A fugitive might already be hiding in the hayloft. Everything depends on timing, and no one knows the clock. The cat moves from the stable to the kitchen, slipping between rooms, like smoke. No one notices but the stable boy, who hears the faint mewl and smiles in the dark. Even this small creature has her own map of the building, her own knowledge of who spills food and who shoos her away. The innkeeper himself does not sleep until the final candle has been snuffed and the last tankard rinsed. He sits at a crude table with a chipped abacus and a set of tally sticks, muttering as he tracks accounts. How many loaves used? How much barley remains? Which customer paid in coin versus credit? He adds a scratch beside the minstrel's name. Partial payment in song, but they'll owe again if they return. He scratches another next to the cloth merchant. Paid, but sour about. The room reassignment. These notes are mental as much as numerical. Running an inn is as much about remembering faces and grudges as it is about boiling broth. Just before dawn, a knock comes at the back entrance. 3 firm taps. The innkeeper stiffens. This is not the front door, and this is not the hour for deliveries. He takes a candle and opens it slowly. A figure stands just outside, cloaked, with hands inside their sleeves. The voice is low and familiar. A friar, but not one posted here. He asks for bread and warmth and privacy. The innkeeper hesitates, but then nods and lets him in, guiding him to the room behind the kitchen. No words are exchanged beyond that, and so night passes not quietly but thickly, like something moved through rather than rested in. By the time the earliest light turns the sky to ash and blue, a few travelers are already stirring. The bailiff prepares his records. The cloth merchant ties his bundle. The minstrel stretches, yawns, and resumes tuning his broken lute. The innkeeper's daughter is awake too, sweeping the floor with practiced swipes. Her hands smell of onions and yeast. She yawns once, then twice, then gets on with it. The day ahead will bring more soup, more stories, more coin counted and lost. The pig must be checked, the hearth swept again, and someone will forget their belt or coin pouch as they always do. And the saddlebag? Still tucked near the haystack, now, a little more hidden and maybe, just maybe, emptied in the night. The sun rises, but no trumpets sound. Just another morning. But in this modest building of creaking timbers, sleeping strangers, and borrowed spoons, the medieval world is humming. Its debts and deals, its secrets and survival, all held together by bread crusts, flickering light, and the hope that one more day can be endured. And yet, as you watch the innkeeper turn his key in the lockbox and glance out toward the road, you may wonder, how many of the world's great decisions, alliances, betrayals, even rebellions, began, not in a castle but in a room like this over stew and sleep, ink, grain, and the power of paperwork? You are not standing in the throne room. There are no bronze drums, no sweeping silks, and no emperor to be seen. Instead, you are in a quiet office in the provincial commandery of Nanyang in Han Dynasty, China, somewhere around the 1st century BCE. Here the walls are made of packed earth. The air is thick with the scent of ink, dried bamboo slips, and human sweat. The floor crunches slightly beneath your feet from bits of sand and stray husks. This is the heart of the empire, not where decisions are made, but where they are recorded, filed, executed, and copied fivefold. The room you're in is long and low-ceilinged. Dozens of men sit cross-legged at narrow wooden desks, each with brushes in hand, heads bent in intense focus. These are shy clerks and scribes trained in the art of writing and the interpretation of state law. They are not nobles, not warriors, and not peasants. They exist in the crucial space between. It is their pen strokes that keep the country from dissolving into chaos. It is late spring, which means that census data is arriving from rural districts. Scrolls and bundles of bamboo slips pile up in woven baskets, tallies of people, livestock, land allotments, and tax owed in grain, cloth, or labor. Your eye catches a slip being read aloud by a junior clerk. Household of 5, 2 oxen, 7 moo under millet, 1 son conscripted. There are hundreds like it. The head clerk, his title is Zhubu, is a thin man in his 50s with blackened fingertips from years of brushwork. He wears a worn hemp robe belted with a faded cord, the fabric stiff with ink stains. His voice is calm but stern as he glides between desks, checking characters for precision. One error in a name or figure, and a family might be taxed twice, or conscripted in place of their neighbor. He stops at one desk, clicks his tongue, and taps the student's scroll. The character for field has a stroke too long. It now means waste instead. The student bows his head, mutters an apology, and begins again. These men are not merely copying data. They are the filters of truth. They summarize, collate, and often make judgment calls. They may omit something that seems trivial or adjust a figure to align with expectations. Most are honest. A few are clever enough to be dangerous. Every 5 days, the compiled reports are rolled, sealed, and sent upward to the prefecture. From there, they climb the ladder of administration all the way to the capital at Chang'an. Outside the office, the day is hot and sticky. A farmer stands in line near the tax pavilion, holding a sack of barley on his shoulder and a grain certificate in his fist. This certificate, written by a clerk like the ones inside, is his only proof that he has paid his dues. Lose it, and he may be called to the magistrate's court. Worse still, he might be pressed into corvée labor, building roads or irrigation ditches for months at a time. Inside again, you notice that the clerks have begun their midday break. They rub their sore wrists and shake out the cramps from their knees. One opens a bamboo lunch case and removes a folded lotus leaf containing cold rice, pickled vegetables, and salted radish. Another takes out a rolled text, a copy of the classic, of filial piety, and begins reading quietly. There is no rush. Time, here, is not measured in hours but in scrolls completed. The bureaucracy of Han China is immense. The empire spans thousands of miles, from Korea in the northeast to the edges of the Tarim Basin in the west. And yet, everything must be tracked. How many officials in each county? How much silk produced this season, which river dikes require repair? And how many peasants died of fever last month? It is a machine of record, slow and deliberate, but astonishing in scale. At the highest level, this system is overseen by the 9 ministers, each responsible for an essential function of the state, from rituals and justice to agriculture and imperial stables. But these ministers can do nothing without the reports generated at places like this one. Even the emperor, divine though he may seem, cannot rule without numbers. He depends on grain tallies and criminal logs, not merely omens or poetry. Later in the afternoon, a courier arrives on horseback. Dusty and lean, he carries a sealed bamboo cylinder under his arm. It contains an imperial decree requiring updated labor reports from every southern district. The head clerk breaks the seal, reads the contents silently, and nods. He calls for a junior scribe to begin preparing replies. These will include not only the requested data but also explanations for delays. Bandits disrupted travel near the river crossing. A fire destroyed some records. Local unrest caused temporary absences. The language used is careful, sometimes evasive. Every line implies more than it says. The scribes do not question the decree. Their duty is not to argue, but to record and obey. Still, in the quiet moments, they may wonder. A young clerk, fresh from examination training, whispers to another, "Do you think they even read what we send?" The older clerk shrugs. They read what they want. The rest just keeps the wheels turning. Bureaucracy in ancient China is not a matter of file cabinets and signatures. It is a living structure. Entire careers hinge on a single brushstroke, a recommendation from one superior to another, a flawlessly written character on a report. The examination system, still in its infancy during the Han, will eventually formalize this into a ladder of merit. But even now, talent is quietly recognized. A scribe who writes with clarity, consistency, and the right touch of deference may be promoted to assistant magistrate. A mistake, on the other hand, might be punished with demotion or flogging. As the sun begins to set, the clerks clean their desks and extinguish oil lamps. Scrolls are wrapped and sealed. Inkstones are rinsed and stored. One clerk counts the remaining bamboo slips, short by 7. He frowns but says nothing. They will appear, or they will not. Missing documents are not unusual. After all, this is a system built by humans. You step outside as the wind picks up and rustles the pine trees lining the compound. A bell chimes from the temple across the way. It's not a call to prayer, it's a time signal. Evening. A servant appears with a pot of millet porridge for those who remain behind to finish work. The head clerk stands by the gate, squinting toward the horizon. He has served here for over 20 years and he has never left the province. Yet through documents and scrolls he has touched nearly every corner of the empire. And as you watch him lean against the gatepost, you might begin to understand. Empires are not truly held together by armies or emperors. They are held together by paperwork, by the thousands of hands quietly recording, calculating, and maintaining a fragile order, slip by slip, character by character. But here's the lingering thought. How much of what was written here, every name, every measurement, every event, was quietly adjusted, smoothed, or exaggerated? How much of what we think we know about ancient China rests on the quiet decisions of a clerk trying to make sense of a messy world? Promotions, punishments, and the machinery of control. You are now inside a different building. This one part of a local yamen, or government office, in the bustling county seat of Yingchuan during the reign of Emperor Wu of Han. The room smells of pine resin and lacquered wood. Here, the silence of clerks is interrupted not by casual conversation, but by the low murmurs of legal testimony, the scratch of bamboo against writing surfaces, and the occasional thump of a gavel, simple, repetitive, functional. The clerk's world expands beyond mere record-keeping now. Here, bureaucracy becomes law. This yamen is headed by a magistrate, appointed from the central government and dispatched from Chang'an or Luoyang. But in reality, his efficiency depends almost entirely on the staff beneath him: scribes, runners, messengers, and inspectors. In Han China, bureaucrats didn't just maintain data. They implemented justice, assessed taxes, conducted examinations, and even supervised public beatings when decreed by law. They were functionaries, yes, but also enforcers of order. Take the case of a land dispute brought before the court today. 2 farmers, both with hand-calloused fingers and worn tunics, stand at attention before the magistrate's dais. The younger claims that a flood redirected the boundary of his field. The elder says it's theft. There are no lawyers, no public gallery, only a low-ranking Sharon, scribe, bent over a scroll, recording the testimony word for word. His ink brush dances methodically across bamboo slats, forming characters with calm precision. The testimony must be recorded neutrally. No emotion, no flair. The clerk is trained to filter the world through brush and bureaucracy. Once the hearing concludes, a clerk fetches older records of the property in question: weather logs, irrigation maps, tax receipts. Nothing is done from memory. This is the quiet genius of the system. Every action must be traceable through layers of writing. Decisions aren't made by gut or vengeance, but by referring to what was previously written. The Han civil bureaucracy was astonishingly vast. Over 130,000 government workers were in operation at the height of the dynasty, stretching from coastal ports to desert oases. There were censors assigned to monitor officials, inspectors tasked with surprise visits, and archivists who filed tax records by dynasty and region. A governor in the north might never meet his counterpart in the south, yet they worked in sync thanks to identical procedures taught through shared manuals, edicts, and training. These procedures were often painfully specific. For instance, there were rules on how much ink to use per character in imperial documents. The exact placement of seals mattered. The number of copies required for a tax report, often 7, ensured that even if local archives burned, records survived at the prefectural, provincial, and central levels. Entire forests were consumed for the sake of redundancy. But bureaucracy was more than just thorough. It was aspirational. You might notice a nervous-looking clerk hanging around the corridor, smoothing his sleeves repeatedly. His name is Chen. He's awaiting news from the capital. His application to be promoted to assistant county clerk has been under review for months. The decision hinges not only on his handwriting, which is quite elegant, but also on a set of recommendations from higher-ups, the outcome of his moral assessment, including whether he is seen as filial and restrained, and, curiously, his regional origin. The state preferred to assign officials away from their native provinces to discourage corruption and favoritism. His odds are moderate. Competition is fierce. During the Han period, the path to high office wasn't yet standardized by the later imperial examination system, but promotion still depended on a mix of talent, connections, and luck. Recommendation played a major role. Superiors had to vouch for their underlings, often based on observed discipline, moral behavior, and an invisible code of quiet competence. Failure wasn't fatal, but it was hard to recover from. A miswritten decree or miscounted grain shipment could result in punishment ranging from salary reduction to flogging or dismissal. In some cases, the punishment wasn't even directed at the original offender. In a system built on written delegation, a supervisor was held accountable for their underlings' mistakes. This created immense pressure to vet, monitor, and sometimes micromanage those below. Imagine now the life of a mid-level bureaucrat posted to a rural town hundreds of li from his home. His family might remain in the capital. His children might grow up with only letters sent once a season. He is expected to maintain accurate records of births, conscriptions, taxes, thefts, marriages, and deaths, sometimes in regions prone to banditry or famine. He is poorly paid and sometimes reviled by locals. Yet his scrolls, dozens of them, travel up the ladder of the imperial administration, forming the bedrock of policy decisions that affect millions. Even more than soldiers, it is these bureaucrats who carry the burden of empire. They are the connective tissue between farmers and emperors, judges and convicts, governors and commoners. Now picture a shipment arriving from the Central Archive in Chang'an. It contains revised legal codes, including changes to the corvée labor obligations for families with only one adult male. This may seem minor, but for countless households, it determines whether a father stays home for harvest or is sent for months to repair distant roads. The message is delivered via official courier and opened by the county magistrate. But the actual enforcement falls to the scribes. They rewrite the law into simplified phrasing, create regional duplicates, draft notices, and supervise runners, tasked with informing each hamlet. One mistake in transcription, and the entire district could misapply the law. There's no room for ambition here, only accuracy. Bureaucracy also had a spiritual element. Confucian principles underpinned the entire moral framework of the state. Bureaucrats weren't just record keepers, they were guardians of social order. Their personal behavior was seen as reflective of the government's virtue. Thus, officials were encouraged to demonstrate filial piety, temperance, and loyalty. Rituals marked promotions. Oaths were sworn. In many regions, civil servants prayed at local temples for wisdom before the yearly audit. There was an expectation of harmony, of serving not for profit or fame, but as part of a cosmic order. A well-run district was not only efficient, but in balance. To be a good bureaucrat was to be invisible, precise, and obedient to hierarchy. But that's not to say ambition didn't exist. There are murmurs in the scriptorium today. One of the newly appointed junior clerks is the son of a silk merchant, and was reportedly placed into his position through a gift of fine cloth to the magistrate's steward. Everyone knows it, but no one says it aloud. Corruption existed, of course, but it had to be performed with subtlety. Gifts given on auspicious days, banquets held with no agenda, language in the scrolls carefully neutral. One wrong metaphor in a recommendation letter, and an official could be accused of favoritism. And what of the reports themselves? You wonder, with so many scrolls flowing upward, were the central officials overwhelmed? Could they even process? The mountains of documentation arriving weekly? The answer is barely. The Imperial Chancellery employed thousands of clerks and readers who sifted through incoming materials, summarized them, and passed only the most relevant up to the emperor and his court. This introduced a dangerous filter. What was deemed important was often shaped by politics, mood, or misunderstanding. Consider famine reports. One governor might exaggerate hardship to receive more aid. Another might downplay disaster to avoid being blamed for negligence. The clerks in Chang'an had no way to confirm the facts on the ground. Thus, policy decisions, dispatching food, reallocating troops, were made based on filtered truth, captured in ink by overworked hands hundreds of miles away. So much power in so few brushstrokes. As the day winds down, the young clerk named Chen receives a letter, not from the central office but from his aging father. It contains simple words of encouragement and a folded piece of gold leaf paper with a protective proverb. "Write what is true and you will sleep in peace," it says. Chen closes the letter carefully and tucks it into the sleeve of his robe. He returns to his scroll. And here is where we end for now. In a candlelit room, surrounded by paper and quiet diligence with thousands of lives, taxed, punished, fed, recorded, depending on the careful balance of diligence, honor, and survival. It's easy to forget that history was once a blank surface. Someone, somewhere, had to choose what was worth writing. But how many lives lost to paper or excluded from it never made it into those records at all? Ink, memory, and the fragile record of empire. The year is now AD 14, near the end of the Western Han dynasty. Political tremors are beginning to shake the seemingly unshakable foundations of the imperial order. In the palaces of Chang'an, debates rage over succession, while in provinces like Shu and Nanyang, rumors of corruption and peasant unrest trickle through the corridors of magistrates' offices like whispers behind paper screens. But the clerks keep writing. You find yourself again among the bureaucrats, not in a courthouse or market registry this time, but deep in an archive. A warehouse-sized room in the capital stacked from floor to ceiling with bamboo slips bound by cords, wax-sealed packets of imperial orders and copies of regional reports. There are no windows, just oil lamps spaced between rows of catalog tables. The clerks here work in shifts, some even sleeping in corners on straw mats to guard the archives against fire, flood, or theft. This room is a monument to order, yet also to the fragility of memory. Each slip, each string-bound bundle contains decisions. How many men were conscripted from a village, whether a tax debt was forgiven, who was pardoned, who was exiled. But scrolls rot, paper molds, ink fades. Rats chew through centuries of documentation in a single season. Fire, always a looming danger, has already erased more than one dynasty's worth of paperwork. To preserve its legacy, the Han government developed obsessive redundancy. Records were copied and recopied, with parallel versions sent to different departments: the Ministry of Revenue, the local inspectorates, the Chancellor's Court, even the Emperor's private study. Archivists were trained not only in writing, but also in preservation, cleaning slips with alcohol, drying them in the sun, storing them in lacquered boxes sealed against pests. Some records were even engraved in stone. In fact, by the end of the later Han period, Confucian classics were carved into massive stone tablets at the Imperial Academy. This was partly ideological, a gesture of eternal truth, but also practical. Stone, unlike bamboo or silk, could survive fire. The bureaucrats had grown wary of ephemerality. Still, ink remained the lifeblood of empire. Clerks trained for years in specific calligraphic styles that signaled hierarchy and legitimacy. A hurried stroke in a scroll could be interpreted as disrespect or incompetence. Every government edict, no matter how minor, required perfect form. Even spacing was considered a moral act. An orderly brush signified an orderly mind. These writing systems shaped not just communication but control. A clerk could delay a tax shipment by miscopying a single date. A governor could suppress rebellion reports by omitting names from rosters. While the emperor sat atop the imperial pyramid, the clerical network beneath him acted as the nervous system, processing signals, sometimes filtering or even distorting them before they reached the head. But it wasn't sabotage. Most of the time, it was survival. In the outer provinces, where officials lived far from the oversight of court inspectors, day-to-day governance became a negotiation with reality. A flood might destroy a tax harvest, but the form still needed to be filed. Soldiers might desert en route to the capital, but the conscription quotas couldn't be revised. So officials, quietly and with great care, fabricated compliance. They filled in names, numbers, and goods as if nothing had gone wrong. There was even a term for it: baobi, the art of covering over. This wasn't seen as criminal so much as pragmatic. The goal of administration wasn't perfection, it was harmony. So long as order appeared to be maintained, the system was satisfied. Only when things became too visible, when peasants rebelled or grain failed to appear, did scrutiny sharpen. And then the slow blades of discipline were drawn. One such blade fell in the year 9 AD, when a minor bureaucrat named Liu Shu was executed in the province of Liang for deliberate misreporting. His crime? Submitting a falsified flood damage report that undercounted displaced families. The central court had ordered disaster relief. When local officials arrived to find villages in greater ruin than expected, suspicion fell on Liu. He had meant no harm. He feared being accused of negligence if he admitted the full scale of the disaster, but the paper trail betrayed him. Still others survived similar acts. Some clerks became experts in soft deception, delaying scrolls without denying them, using ambiguous language to avoid accountability. An order from the capital might ask, how many men were available for military labor? A clever bureaucrat could answer with a phrase like, sufficient numbers have been recorded, avoiding specifics. In times of uncertainty, vague writing was a form of armor. But not all clerks were manipulators. Many truly believed in the mission. They saw themselves not as paper pushers, but as guardians of a fragile civilization built on knowledge and reason. To them, each scroll was a thread in a tapestry. If one unraveled, so might the whole. This sense of responsibility was deeply personal. There are letters, preserved in later dynastic anthologies, in which Han-era clerks lamented their mistakes. Overlooked, names in registers, math errors, and crop reports. One clerk, writing from his sickbed, begged his superior to forgive a miscount that had resulted in an overtaxed village. Let them keep their rice, he wrote. I accept the shame. Bureaucracy, for all its dryness, was a moral enterprise, and it was also a tool for centralization. As Han China expanded westward into the Tarim Basin and southward toward the Red River Delta, each new territory was absorbed through administration. Roads followed troops, but scrolls followed roads. Wherever a garrison was posted, a tax register would soon follow. Local leaders were taught to keep records in Chinese. Tribute was standardized. Measurement units were harmonized. It was not just empire by sword, it was empire by slip. And so a new kind of clerk emerged, the traveling inspector. These were men of education and adaptability, sent to assess local offices, audit grain stores, review tax procedures, and sometimes replace entire staffs. They moved quietly, often without announcing their arrival. Some were feared, others respected. Their duty was to keep the administrative machine aligned, even at the edges of the known world. One such inspector, Zhang Yi, made a name for himself in the remote province of Jiaoji, modern-day northern Vietnam. He arrived during a period of unrest with tribal uprisings threatening to destabilize the region. Rather than use force, Zhang reviewed land records and discovered a pattern of overtaxation by the local prefect. With quiet precision, he revised the quotas, appeased the population, and prevented a wider revolt. No statue was erected in his honor, but his scrolls were preserved. What remains most astonishing about the Han bureaucracy isn't just its scale, but its continuity. Many of the practices developed during this time, standardized forms, redundant reporting, moral evaluations, regional quotas, were replicated, refined, and reused for nearly 2,000 years. Later dynasties like the Tang and Song would add civil examinations, formalize ranks, and elevate scholar officials to new heights. But the scaffolding was laid here, in these dusty rooms and forgotten courtrooms, where men in simple robes wrote characters with care, They didn't seek fame. Most of their names are lost, and yet their work made continuity possible. It allowed the empire to survive famines, coups, invasions, and internal strife. Not through charisma or military genius, but through ledgers and laws, through bureaucracy. You, step outside now, past the gates of the yamen and into the early twilight. The smell of ink still lingers in your clothes. Behind you, a clerk lights a lamp and dips his brush into an inkwell, beginning a new report. The characters unfold silently, each stroke a promise, a mirror, a claim. You may wonder, of all the empires that rose and fell, how many survived, not because of generals or kings, but because someone, somewhere, remembered to write it all down. The grind of combat and the quiet heroism of survival. The sun climbs higher, burning off the mist, and the battle shifts from anticipation to brutal reality. The shield wall you stand behind is no longer just a formation. It becomes a living, breathing entity held together by sweat, grit, and sheer force of will. Your arms tremble as you raise your shield again and again, the dull thuds of incoming blows vibrating through the wood and leather. Every breath is heavy, every movement measured. Combat in a medieval battle is nothing like the dramatic clashes sung by minstrels. It is exhausting, slow, and often monotonous. You learn to listen to the grunt of your comrades, the scrape of metal, the distant shout of commanders. The shield wall shifts and tightens as waves of attackers push forward, but breaks occasionally, only to be sealed again by those willing to fall back and then advance. Your spear is not a weapon of glory but of necessity, thrusting at faces hidden behind helmets, jabbing at exposed ankles, always defending as much as attacking. Amid the chaos, small acts of endurance become victories. A comrade who holds his ground after a spear pierces his shield. A messenger who navigates the chaos to deliver orders. A man who pulls a fallen friend from the mud, risking his own life to save another. These are the quiet heroes of battle, unknown to history, but vital to its unfolding. At the edges of the shield wall, knights on horseback struggle to find purchase. Their charge is slowed by the muddy ground and the dense mass of infantry. You watch a knight topple, caught in the undergrowth, his horse rearing in panic before it too falls. This moment, more than the thunder of charging cavalry, is what often determines the flow of battle. Between lulls, you catch glimpses of the enemy, faces as scared and tired as your own. The battle is less about hate and more about survival and duty. You see men faltering, some screaming, some silent with shock. The sheer weight of human suffering presses down, and your focus narrows to the immediate. The next breath, the next thrust, the next shield bash. As the day drags on, fatigue and injury take their toll. Men drop silently, their bodies sinking into the mud. Medics, if you can call them that, rush forward, binding wounds with rags soaked in vinegar. Others are left behind, abandoned to the mercy of the battlefield or the approaching night. Commanders struggle to maintain order, sending reinforcements to faltering sections, rallying fleeing men, and trying to exploit weaknesses. But with every charge, every push, the line becomes more brittle. The difference between order and chaos is measured in seconds and inches. You wonder, in this endless grind, where is the moment of glory? Where is the honor so often promised in tales? The answer is simple. It is found in survival, in holding the line when all seems lost, in the quiet determination to stand your ground when others fall. As the sun begins to set, you realize the battle has not been won or lost but suspended. Both armies, bloodied and exhausted, begin to pull back, gathering their dead and tending their wounded. The field is littered with broken weapons, discarded shields, and the silent testament of countless lives. The shield wall remains, not as a symbol of triumph, but as a reminder of endurance. The battle will resume, when, where, and how only. Time will tell. For now, the quiet heroism of those who lived to fight another day is the true story of medieval war. And you wonder, if survival is the real victory, how did the men who never left the shield wall remember their role in history? Aftermath, memory, and the silent lessons of war as dawn breaks after the battle. The once-ordered shield wall lies broken and scattered. The field, now cold and quiet, bears the scars of violence, not in heroic tales, but in the mundane, agonizing details of aftermath. Bodies stiffen in the early light, weapons lie half-buried in the mud. The smell of blood, sweat, and earth hangs heavily in the air, a grim reminder of the cost exacted. You, if you survived, awaken with aching limbs and a mind weighed down by exhaustion and memories. Your armor is dented, your shield cracked, and your clothes torn. Around you, comrades move in silence, tending to wounds, dragging the dead into shallow graves, or simply staring into the distance. There is no celebration here, no triumph. Just the slow, methodical work of surviving yet another day. Medieval battles rarely brought swift, decisive conclusions. Many ended inconclusively, or were followed by drawn-out sieges, negotiations, or retreats. The victory often belonged to those who could replenish men and supplies rather than those who claimed glory on the field. For you, a common soldier, the war continued in the long marches home, the scars you bore, and the memories etched into your mind. Stories of battles tend to highlight kings and knights, but it is the experience of ordinary men, the foot soldiers, the camp followers, the medics who shaped the reality of war. Their lives, full of hardship, fear, and quiet courage, offer a different perspective from the tales of heroism. They reveal a history rooted not in legend but in survival and resilience. Over time, the names of battles may fade from memory, but the lessons endure. The importance of discipline, the slow erosion of morale, the unpredictability of weather and terrain. These are the true forces that determined outcomes. They teach us about the nature of conflict itself, a human struggle marked less by glory and more by endurance. In reflecting on the shield wall, you realize that its strength was not in individual valor, but in collective will. Each man's decision to hold firm, to stand shoulder to shoulder with strangers, was an act of shared purpose. The shield wall was a fragile, temporary fortress, built not of stone, but of trust and tenacity. In today's world, distant from swords and spears, the echoes of those battles linger. The strategies, the discipline, and the human stories remind us that history is not only made by rulers and generals, but by the countless individuals whose quiet acts of survival shape the course of events. And so, as you lay down your shield and close your eyes, you carry with you not just the memory of a battle, but the deeper truth that sometimes the most significant victories are those fought in silence, with no glory, only the determination to endure. What lessons might we draw from these silent struggles, and how do they shape our understanding of courage today? Morning light and the stirring of the inn as dawn breaks over a medieval village. The world outside is still quiet, touched only by the pale light filtering through narrow windows. But inside the village inn, life is already beginning to stir. The tavern's wooden beams creak softly as the first embers in the hearth glow faintly, waiting for the hands that will coax them back to flame. You might expect an inn to be a lively place full of raucous laughter and clinking mugs, but mornings are different. The bustle of travelers and townsfolk has yet to arrive. Instead, the morning is a time of preparation, routine, and quiet labor. The innkeeper rises early, often before the first cocks crow, to stoke the fire and sweep the floors. The smell of damp straw mats mingles with the faint aroma of last night's ale fermenting in barrels stored in the cellar. Outside, the roosters begin to call, and the village slowly comes alive. But inside the inn, the rhythm is steady and measured. The innkeeper's family, if present, helps with chores, fetching water from the well, tending to the small kitchen garden, and preparing simple meals from root vegetables and salted meat. There are no fresh fruits or exotic spices here. Travelers might dream of such luxuries, but the inn survives on what is locally grown or preserved. The tavern's tables and benches are wiped clean of the grime left by the previous night's guests. Ashes from the hearth are gathered and discarded. Barrels are checked for leaks. These mundane tasks ensure the inn's readiness, not just for comfort, but for survival. An inn that falls into disrepair loses customers quickly, and with them, the essential coin needed to keep the hearth burning. As the sun climbs higher, the innkeeper watches the village road, waiting for the first travelers, merchants with heavy carts, weary pilgrims, or local farmers seeking a place to rest and share news. Each arrival is a small event, a ripple in the otherwise steady flow of daily life. Despite the inn's modest appearance, a sturdy timber-framed building with a thatched roof, it is a crossroads of stories. Travelers bring tales from distant towns and news of distant wars or market prices. But more often than not, the stories are repetitive, the same complaints about bad weather, the same worries about the harvest or the toll of taxes. Inside, the innkeeper's role is as much about listening and observing as it is about serving food and drink. Word travels quickly through these halls, and the innkeeper must gauge friend from foe, truth from rumor. The tavern is a stage where alliances are made, disputes begin and end, and the village's pulse can be felt. Yet, amid the daily grind, there is little glamour. The innkeeper is neither noble nor warrior. Their work is exhausting and never-ending. The cold winter nights require stoking fires and repairing leaks. Summer brings the challenge of flies and keeping water fresh. Illness visits frequently, and the innkeeper must care for sick guests or decide when to send them away. Through it all, the inn is a fragile enterprise, balanced precariously between hospitality and hardship. The ordinary lives behind the tavern's glow are woven from repetition, endurance, and quiet resilience. And so you might ask, what draws travelers back to this modest refuge again and again, despite its hardships and the relentless passage of time? Midday hustle and the web of connections. By midday, the quiet morning atmosphere of the medieval inn transforms into a more vibrant, yet controlled hustle. Travelers and locals gather, each bringing their own stories, concerns, and needs into the timbered walls. The innkeeper moves among them, managing orders for food and ale, but also carefully observing the interactions that quietly shape the social fabric of the village and beyond. The kitchen, if it can be called that, is a simple space usually dominated by a large hearth where pots bubble slowly over the fire. Meals are hearty but basic: pottages thick with vegetables, coarse bread, salted pork or smoked fish, and occasionally a ration of cheese. There are no delicate sauces or exotic spices here. Instead, the food reflects the land and season, meant to fill hungry bellies rather than delight refined palates. The ale served is often thin and sour by modern standards, but for medieval travelers, it is safer than water and provides much-needed calories and warmth. The barrels are stored carefully to avoid spoilage, but quality can vary, and a bad batch can damage the inn's reputation quickly. As guests eat and drink, the inn becomes a crossroads for communication. Merchants exchange prices and gossip from market towns. Pilgrims share news of distant shrines and the hardships of their journeys. Local farmers discuss the changing weather and the hope or dread it brings for the harvest. The innkeeper listens, carefully, knowing that this flow of information can carry both opportunity and danger. News of upcoming taxes, approaching armies, or outbreaks of disease all pass through these walls. It is here that alliances may be forged, disputes cooled or inflamed, and community decisions influenced. Behind the scenes, the innkeeper also manages a small staff, often family members or trusted locals who assist with cleaning, serving, and maintenance. This workforce is crucial but precarious. Illness, accidents, or conflicts can quickly disrupt operations. The innkeeper must balance kindness with authority to keep the business running smoothly. Financial pressures loom large. The inn's survival depends on steady customers, and during bad seasons or wars, travelers may be fewer. Payment is not always in coin. Sometimes goods, labor, or favors stand in exchange. These arrangements require negotiation and trust, further weaving the inn into the village's economy and social web. Outside, the village's rhythms influence the inn's fortunes. Market days bring a surge of visitors, while harvest seasons may empty the roads. The innkeeper adjusts prices and offerings accordingly, sometimes making difficult choices to keep the business afloat. Despite the busy midday scene, there are moments of quiet observation. Watching the interplay of patrons reveals a microcosm of medieval society. The hierarchies, the tensions, and the shared humanity beneath it all. The innkeeper becomes an unseen chronicler of these stories, their own life intertwined with those who pass through. And yet amid this constant motion, the question remains, what personal toll does this demanding life take on those who dedicate themselves to running the inn, day after day, year after year? Evening shadows and the weight of a life. Unseen as dusk falls over the village, the inn's glow spills warm and inviting into the cooling air. Outside, the chatter fades and shadows lengthen, but inside, the day's final hours are often the busiest and most revealing. The innkeeper's hands are never still, moving between pouring ale, setting tables, and listening to the murmurs that fill the room. Evening guests tend to be a different sort. Laborers off the fields, traveling minstrels, or groups of men sharing stories and disputes after a hard day's work. The atmosphere can shift from convivial to tense within moments. A spilled drink, a careless word, or an old grudge revived. The innkeeper walks the line between mediator and servant, smoothing over conflicts before they escalate. Behind the conviviality lies another layer, the exhaustion and sacrifice of those who keep the inn running. The innkeeper rarely sits. Their body aches from long hours. Their mind carries the constant weight of responsibility. There are no holidays or breaks in this cycle, only the relentless passage of days and seasons. Family life is often entwined with the business. Children grow up within these walls, learning the hard work and unpredictability of tavern life. The innkeeper's spouse may take on additional chores or manage the household, often without recognition. Together they form a small but vital unit, their resilience quietly holding the community together. The inn also serves as a refuge for the vulnerable, travelers too poor to afford private rooms, the sick seeking shelter, or the lonely looking for company. The innkeeper's compassion is tested daily, balancing kindness with the need to maintain order and survive financially. As the last patrons leave, the inn grows quiet again. The hearth's fire burns low, and the innkeeper begins the final tasks, cleaning the floor, securing the doors, and preparing for the next day. It is a repetitive cycle, with little change except the passing seasons and the slow aging of those who live it. Looking back, the innkeeper's life may seem ordinary, even unremarkable. Yet within this routine lies a profound human story of endurance, community, and the often invisible labor that supports society. The tavern's glow is not just light in the darkness, but a symbol of survival amid hardship. You might wonder, how many stories, friendships, and quiet acts of kindness were forged in places like this, never recorded, but vital to the fabric of medieval life? Food preparation, preservation, and the household kitchen. Once you returned home from the marketplace with your humble basket of ingredients, the work of transforming these raw materials into something edible truly began. Unlike the kitchens of the wealthy, where slaves and specialized cooks labored over elaborate meals, the common Roman household kitchen was modest and functional, often little more than a corner of a room with a hearth and some basic implements. The hearth was central. It provided heat for cooking and warmth in colder months. A simple clay or brick oven might be present, but many meals were prepared over open flames or hot coals. Pots were heavy and made from earthenware or metal, and utensils were minimal. Wooden, spoons, simple knives, and perhaps a mortar and pestle for grinding herbs or grains. Preparing food was labor-intensive. Grains often required grinding, sometimes by hand, to produce coarse flour. Vegetables needed cleaning and chopping, and pulses soaked overnight to reduce cooking time. Cooking itself could take hours, especially for stews and porridges that simmered slowly to extract flavor and nutrients. Preservation was a constant concern. Without refrigeration, Romans relied on drying, salting, smoking, and pickling to extend the shelf life of meat and fish. Salt was a precious commodity, vital not only for flavor, but for survival. Salted pork, a staple for many, could be stored for weeks or months, offering a reliable protein source when fresh meat was unavailable. Garum, the fermented fish sauce ubiquitous in Roman cuisine, was both a flavor enhancer and a form of preservation. Produced in large vats by fermenting fish entrails and salt, garum was added sparingly to many dishes, providing a salty umami taste that masked the blandness of simpler foods. Meals were typically eaten twice a day. Breakfast, or ientaculum, was light and quick, often bread dipped in wine or water, with perhaps some cheese or olives. The main meal, cena, occurred in the afternoon or early evening and was usually the largest. It was practical, filling, and eaten quickly, often standing or sitting on simple stools. For the poor, food was rarely a pleasure. It was a necessity that shaped the rhythms of daily life. Yet, even in this modest fare, there was a culture of sharing and community. Food preparation was often a family or communal task, and meals were a time to connect and exchange news. The kitchen was also a place of resourcefulness. Leftovers were commonly reused or transformed into new dishes. Bread might be soaked in, vinegar and oil to create a simple salad, or stale food softened into soups or porridges. Waste was minimized, reflecting both necessity and respect for scarce resources. The diet of ordinary Romans was a delicate balance between scarcity and sufficiency, flavor, and functionality. Their food shaped not only their health but their social interactions, economic decisions, and cultural identity. So, as you consider this glimpse into a humble Roman kitchen, you might wonder, how did these daily struggles and small innovations in food preparation influence the larger Roman society, especially during times of crisis or change? Scarcity, surplus, and the resilience of Rome's food supply. The vast city of Rome, with its population reaching into the hundreds of thousands at its peak, depended on an intricate and often fragile food supply chain. While you, as an ordinary Roman, might only see your humble meals, these simple plates were part of a vast system stretching across the empire, from fertile plains to distant provinces, carried by river, sea, and road. Food scarcity was a constant threat. Crop failures, war, political unrest, or natural disasters could disrupt supply lines, sending prices soaring and turning bread into a luxury. Famine was never far from the minds of Romans, especially the poor, who relied heavily on the government's grain dole, the annona, a public distribution system intended to prevent widespread hunger and civil unrest. The annona itself was a remarkable feat of administration. Grain was imported from provinces such as Egypt and North Africa, brought in by fleets of merchant ships to the port of Ostia, then transported via river barges up the Tiber to the city. Once in Rome, it was stored in massive granaries and distributed carefully to citizens registered for the dole. Yet the system was not flawless. Corruption, spoilage, or delays could mean the difference between a full belly and starvation. When supplies ran short, riots sometimes broke out, revealing the precariousness beneath the city's grandeur. Surpluses, when they occurred, were stored in granaries or used to feed livestock. Farmers and merchants were constantly negotiating the thin line between profit and providing affordable food. Local markets buzzed with activity, adjusting to seasons and political demands. Amid these challenges, ordinary Romans adapted. They developed ways to stretch food supplies, mixing grains, preserving leftovers, and cultivating kitchen gardens even in cramped urban spaces. The reliance on pulses, vegetables, and salted or dried foods was not just tradition, but necessity. This resilience shaped the health and longevity of the population. While diseases and malnutrition were common, the relative stability of food, availability compared to other ancient cities, was a testament to Rome's complex infrastructure and the daily efforts of countless individuals, from farmers to market vendors, bakers to innkeepers. Ultimately, the story of how ordinary Romans fed themselves is not just about food. It is about the survival of a society built on intricate networks of trade, labor, and governance. The simple loaf of bread or bowl of porridge carried with it the weight of empire. And so you might reflect, in a world without supermarkets or refrigeration, how did the rhythms of supply and demand, scarcity and surplus, shape not just meals, but the fate of one of history's greatest cities? Before the battle, the everyday, lives of foot soldiers. When you imagine a medieval battle, grand images of knights in shining armor, clashing swords, and heroic charges might come to mind. Yet, the reality for most soldiers was far less glamorous and far more grueling. The majority of medieval armies were composed not of knights but of foot soldiers, common men drawn from peasantry, townsfolk, or mercenaries, whose daily existence was shaped as much by camp life as by combat. Long before the first arrow was loosed or the first sword swung, these foot soldiers faced a life of hard labor, discomfort, and uncertainty. Recruitment could be forced or voluntary, often motivated by pay, survival, or feudal obligation. Many soldiers left behind families and farms, entering a world where discipline and hierarchy governed every moment. Camps were rudimentary. Soldiers slept on the ground or on rough straw bedding, sheltered by simple tents or whatever natural cover they could find. Hygiene was minimal, with scarce clean water and few latrines, leading to disease outbreaks that could claim more lives than the battle itself. Meals were basic and repetitive: hard biscuits, salted meat, and pottage made from grains or legumes. Fresh food was rare, and cooking was a communal, time-consuming task. Soldiers had to carry their own equipment, often heavy and cumbersome, adding to their exhaustion. Training was inconsistent. Many soldiers were poorly armed and trained, relying on crude weapons like spears, axes, or makeshift clubs. Armor was patchwork and often scavenged or second-hand. Despite these hardships, camaraderie and shared purpose forged bonds among the ranks. The waiting before battle was often long and tense. Soldiers stood watch, tended their weapons, and whispered rumors and prayers. The psychological strain was immense, compounded by the unpredictability of warfare and the fear of death or capture. As you picture this life, far from the glory of chivalric tales, you might wonder, how did these ordinary men endure the physical and mental toll of medieval warfare, and what stories remain untold beyond the battlefield? Then the daily grind, camp. Routines and survival tactics. Life in a medieval army camp was a complex balance of routine, survival, and constant vigilance. For foot soldiers, the camp was not only their temporary home, but a small mobile community where survival depended on adaptability, cooperation, and endurance. Dawn often arrived with the blare of horns or the shouting of officers, rousing soldiers from fitful sleep on damp ground. The first tasks were practical and urgent: cleaning weapons, repairing armor, gathering firewood, and preparing meager meals. These chores were essential, as a broken spear or dull sword could mean death in battle. Food remained a central concern. Rations were limited and often consisted of hardtack, dry, hard biscuits that could last weeks without spoiling, and salted or smoked meat. Fresh produce was scarce, leading to nutritional deficiencies and ailments like scurvy. Water had to be collected from nearby streams or wells, and maintaining cleanliness was a challenge in crowded conditions. Sanitation was rudimentary, and the close quarters encouraged the spread of diseases such as dysentery, typhus, and respiratory infections. Medical knowledge was limited. Field surgeons or barbers offered basic treatments, often without anesthesia or sterilization. Despite these hardships, soldiers found ways to maintain morale. Storytelling, singing, and religious rituals provided comfort and distraction. Letters from home, when they arrived, were treasured. Some soldiers engaged in informal trades, repairing equipment or brewing ale, adding small comforts to their lives. Discipline was strict. Drunkenness, theft, or disobedience were punished harshly to maintain order. Officers enforced drills and formations to prepare for the chaos of battle, where cohesion often meant survival. Camp life was also a place of negotiation between commanders and troops, between soldiers and local populations. Foraging for food or lodging in nearby villages sometimes caused tension, yet was necessary for sustenance. Understanding and navigating these relationships could mean the difference between hardship and relative comfort. This daily grind, repetitive and taxing, was the backdrop against which the horror of battle would erupt. It shaped the physical and mental resilience of soldiers, often unnoticed in grand historical narratives. So as you consider the camp's mundane realities, you might ask, what strength and stories lay hidden in these moments far from the battlefields? Spotlight. After the battle, wounds, survival, and the return to camp. The clash of steel and roar of battle were terrifying, But for most foot soldiers, the true test began after the fighting stopped. The battlefield, often strewn with bodies and debris, became a place of grim survival, where the wounded, the weary, and the dead mingled in a chaotic and dangerous landscape. As a foot soldier, you would likely have faced wounds inflicted by swords, arrows, or spears, many deep and brutal. Medical care was rudimentary at best. Field surgeons worked quickly, often under unsanitary conditions, performing amputations or extracting arrows without anesthesia. Infection was common and frequently fatal. Those lucky enough to survive the immediate aftermath faced a journey back to camp, carrying the physical and psychological scars of combat. The return was slow and painful, with the injured relying on comrades for support. Fear of abandonment or further injury haunted many. In camp, the realities of recovery were harsh. There was little in the way of convalescence. Wounded soldiers might be left to rest among the living and dead alike with minimal food and care. Some were deemed too injured to continue and abandoned or left behind during marches. Yet, life went on. The army moved, replenished, and prepared for the next challenge. Stories of bravery mixed with tales of misery. The bonds forged in these moments of shared pain, survival, and loss formed the invisible fabric of medieval armies. For many, the end of battle marked not victory or defeat, but the continuation of hardship. Returning to farms, families, or uncertain futures, soldiers carried with them experiences rarely recorded in chronicles or songs. This hidden side of medieval warfare, beyond tactics and leaders, reminds us that history is shaped by countless individuals enduring struggle and resilience in the most trying circumstances. As you reflect on these untold stories, you might wonder, how did these ordinary soldiers' experiences influence the broader course of medieval history and the societies they left behind?